Alrighty, it looks like we are live. Need to make sure the video's appearing on here correctly. A little bit of delay. Alright, I think we're good. Today we're going to be talking about opportunity cost. I think it is one of the most misunderstood principles in investing, yet one of the most important by far. So I figured today might be a good day to talk about that. Oh, I forgot the light. Oopsies. Might be good to actually be able to see something. So, when I say opportunity cost, what do I mean? I mean when you could have done one thing, but you could have done another thing, and then the difference there is what you miss. It sounds very fuzzy when you initially say it, but very easy example. I could go to McDonald's for dinner, or I could go to Burger King for dinner. By going to McDonald's, I missed out on being able to go to Burger King. Opportunity cost. Could have had a better time at Burger King. Just depends on the day, I suppose. This is much more of a problem when you look at things like the stock market, where instead of having one or two options, you have thousands, if not tens of thousands if you count the whole world. This all of a sudden becomes much more of a concern. So today I wanted to take some time to go about talking through the basics of opportunity cost in a vacuum, and then apply it to different areas where it comes up in people's life. One, in terms of how they invest in themselves, but two, as well, how they look at investments with their money as well. My brain tends to think about both, so I kind of wanted to go through both. I'm just going to go through the areas that first came to mind as I was going through all of this, and if there's any questions along the way, definitely feel free to put them through. First big one that I see is career-wise. I think whenever I think of opportunity cost, the first place my brain always goes is, well, did you want to go to college, or did you decide to go get a job being a plumber or an electrician or something else? Meaning you have big education that costs lots of money, or you have something where you go get paid immediately, maybe not getting paid as much. The trade-off there can be a lot for people, and I feel like a lot of times with the right job can be a great payoff if you stick with it over the long haul, but there's also plenty of jobs where people make fun of all sorts of different majors of like, hey, you're 200 grand in debt and you didn't get anything from it. I understand that a lot of times it's hard to see that far out, especially when you're asked to make that decision at 17 or 18 years old, but at the same time, I do still, me personally, I think that the opportunity cost of education, not getting education costs you a lot more than just money in a lot of situations, meaning it's not just the income. A lot of it is like, what does your entire life look like? And you can say that a lot of that gets tied to money, which it does, and there are things like status, which can be quite the nature of vanity, but nonetheless, I think it makes a big difference in terms of how you even look at the world, meaning studying economics for me, it changed a lot of how I view things. Opportunity cost is a big example of that. Meaning when I go to do one thing, I could have gone and done so many other things. Instead of being in finance, could have done engineering, or similar to my parents, could have gone and been a doctor, could have been a lawyer. Heck, could have tried to do streaming as a full-time job. There's so many other things could have done. All could have been fine, but the question is, like, for what I wanted out of life, would it have been a better path elsewhere? At least for me personally, I don't think so. I really like numbers, really like being able to work with people, and I like the ability to understand what in the world is going on with a bunch of things. The fact that we ask people to think about all this different stuff at that young age of 17 or 18 years old does make it very tricky for people, because a lot of times trying to conceive of what's even out there before you've tried a bunch of things or had the opportunity to read a bunch of different books or see a bunch of different places, it makes it very hard to take everything into consideration when you don't know what you're missing out on. And a lot of times college is exploring, okay, what am I missing out on by not going and doing all these other things? That makes it a lot harder. I think we're getting a little bit kind of outside the box a little bit. Given the nature of streaming, this is probably going to be a little bit more ranting in nature, so my thoughts might go on and on, but I have a lot of times where my thoughts where it's like, here's one thought, I have something that tangentially relates up here, and there's like, skip a few steps in between, and then they come back, and then they... So apologies if they don't make perfect sense as we're going along. But in terms of like career decisions, I think that a lot of times when you're looking at it, it's easier with smaller blocks of time to look at it like, do I want to go after that promotion? Do I want to get that extra piece of education or certification to go this direction? Do I want to make a complete career change? Like, it's a lot easier in smaller chunks, but a lot of times the best long-term decisions are frequently the ones that take a much longer time. School, honestly, is a big part of it. Like, being a doctor pays really well, but it takes 10 years to basically become one. Between undergrad, you have going through medical school, and usually some form of residency. You know, that takes a long time. Or like, for me, like, had a fairly nice paying job, wanted to start a business. That ended up big backstep doing that type of thing. And I think in a lot of career positions, the best decisions are usually made with the long term of, what do I want total out of my life and how do I get there, versus like all these other little options that I have, trying to compare like all the little small details of like, this one pays $5 more grand, this one has a slightly better location. It's hard to keep that in mind if you aren't aware of all the other things you're giving up. Okay, so another area where this kind of leads to is this mentality of something being like good enough, or you're not doing any damage. Like, a lot of times people understand the negatives. If you're going to get a job, you feel like you're a contributing member of society. You feel like, you know what, this is all right, this is good enough, I'm not harming anybody. But let's say you're in a situation where you're a lot more privileged than a lot of other people. I put myself in this bucket. Then are you actually, like, to the flip side of that, if you're not doing quite a bit of good in that situation and blazing off in a lot of them, it's like, is that opportunity cost of not having gotten some sort of extra benefit, meaning just staying in the middle, is that something wrong in and of itself? And like, I'm not really going to speak to the morality of it, but even in terms of just making money, like, the idea of like, well, I'm doing something, so I feel good about that, versus I could be doing way more to earn way more. It's very easy to be comfortable right in the middle. And it's, you know, life makes that easier. Meaning when you get relationship, you get kids, you get a mortgage, you get a dog. I mean, all of a sudden there's a bunch of things that take up your time, and it makes it harder to want to go do other things. But it's not even that it's necessarily wrong to want to not do more, but a lot of times I feel like what ends up happening is people don't consider the opportunity cost of all the other things they want out of life in terms of when they make that decision. When they want to figure out, okay, I want to live in this place, I want to go travel to this place, I want to be able to do this type of thing for my kids or my parents, and it's hard to analyze all the things that you're missing out on by not pushing a little further, a little harder. Because sometimes it feels like it's just, hey, hustle culture, you just need to work harder just for the sake of working harder. I don't love that. Versus, I have something very specific in mind that I want to get to, and here are the things I need to do in order to get there, and by not doing those things, I'm missing out on the things that are most important to me. That's an opportunity cost. And it's very easy to say, well, not doing drugs, I'm not drinking tons, I'm going to work every day, and I'm not having the very bad side of things by not doing those things, and just getting stuck in the middle. And it's like, if that's what you want, that's a good thing to do. It's just being very blatant and honest about what you want. That's at least my outlook on things. I can have a very headstrong feel about things, and I think that can have pros and cons, but I think how this gets applied to other areas also ends up being fairly important as part of this as well. So if we take that same mentality and we apply that to something like investments, meaning, do we want to be in stocks? Do we want to be in bonds? Do we consider real estate, cryptocurrency? I mean, instead of going, let's do some things. These could be good. This can increase our net worth. It's what exactly do I want and how do I get there? Then it makes it much easier to analyze the opportunity cost of, well, bonds might not earn me enough, real estate could be too much work, stocks could be too dangerous, cryptocurrency could not have enough information involved. I mean, there's so many more things where it's like you consider the qualitative and quantitative side of things in order to get what you want while not just going for the, hey, let's do something good. I think sometimes that conversation gets a lot harder when you take something like, I don't know what I want yet, I need a few years to figure out what I want. So it's harder to analyze, okay, where do I put my money? Because I know I'm missing out by not getting compounding, so then you feel a rush. Like, I need to start putting this money somewhere. But I also don't want to have everything locked up so that I can't do other things with my life. Like, it creates this tension, and that can be really tough. Because I think that concept of, like, good enough, of, like, needing to, like, put your money somewhere and not just letting it be doing absolutely nothing, people seem to get that. But the concept of, like, I need to make it do the exact thing I want to get it to the exact place I need can be a lot tougher. And having those conversations to direct to this is the exactly what I need out of my cash, I mean, you want to talk about something hard for people. That will be up there. So, waiting too long. This kind of applies to investments and the opportunity cost side as well. So, waiting too long on certain parts of your life in order to make this happen. One thing when you overly consider opportunity cost is that sometimes you put off important parts of your life in order to push investments or business stuff ahead. I can be quite guilty of this myself. I got out of school, got a ton of certifications, got a bit of rental property I went into, started a business. This is a whole bunch of stuff that, like, if I put money towards anything else at all, it makes it so that it's very hard to do the business type stuff that I'm focusing on, but it also makes it so putting money towards other things, it feels bad. Like, it hurts me because I'm so aware of, like, how much the compounding can do. But that means that I do things like, well, haven't dated all that much in a couple of years. It's like, here, something there. Or going out to travel a whole bunch. It's like I'll have opportunities and go, well, I need to work, or I need to focus on this, or it makes it so I can't go do this other thing. Or spending time with, like, friends and family as much as I could. It's like, there are a bunch of things that can get pushed off. I've been very guilty of such things, even if I try to do the best with it, that people end up doing. I think relationships and kids are honestly the biggest one I see out of my generation, is like the amount of people who are like, I need to get my career started, I need to not have student loans, I need to be able to push a little further and feel a little bit more comfortable before I start having any sort of family. But then you end up against things like biological clock, which is like, that gets kind of tricky. So that leads back to the same thing before with the investments, where it's like, well, I know what I want to do, and I know the consequences if I don't start doing something now, but if I do just kind of random stuff, it might not get me a very good result. And it's like, you end up with this, like, I need to go faster, and then when you have that time crunch, a lot of times it makes for worse decisions, and it's like, it makes that part of life a lot more complicated. And when you push things off for too long, sometimes you end up making worse decisions. It's like, trying to find the balance of all that is where opportunity cost gets complicated. It's like when you're considering quantitative things with qualitative things. I mean, you're considering, how do I make more money? How does this affect my career, love life? How does this affect the people around me? It gets very complicated very quickly. And this is why, like, the pros and cons of each situation, and then weighing how hard it affects another when you can take into consideration things like compounding, it gets very hard. I think one thing I've seen work for a lot of people, and honestly, take this with a grain of salt, trying to find some sort of balance in all of it can help, but picking the thing that's most important, focusing really hard on it, making it work, and then trying to figure out the rest of it can help a lot. Then again, life experience on me is one I'm still working on. So this also kind of bleeds into like opportunity cost in relationships. I mean, you could be dating this person, you could be messing around with a whole bunch of people, you could be staying long term with someone you met in high school. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things where it's like you see, you could be trying one thing, but then you miss out on a whole bunch of other things, and I just feel bad about people not being able to like see the full picture, but then being highly affected by all of it. So I guess we can bring this a little bit back more to the nature of finance type stuff. Real estate versus stocks is one that I see a lot. So with real estate, one thing that's pretty tricky is it requires a lot of work. So instead of working your job for an extra 10 hours, maybe you're working on real estate 10 hours a week. And that's underballing it when you first get a property, meaning it takes a lot of time. You can turn real estate into a full-time job, even more than full-time. You can work 80 hours a week doing real estate. But the big thing is like the potential to use a lot of debt as leverage to buy more properties to increase income in order to eventually increase how fast equity is growing can be a huge benefit, but you're potentially putting yourself in a lot of danger. You could have been working on a whole lot of other things, and that working on other things could have compelled your income to grow even more as well when it comes to careers or how you apply that to business. And then you look at, okay, if you had taken similar leverage and applied that to stocks, what would have happened? Meaning if you put double the amount into your 401k, but you're $300,000 in debt at 5%, which is just hard to get when you don't have collateral. I don't know why we don't collateralize. I mean, it wouldn't be healthy for the economy, but collateralizing stocks doesn't work as well as on real estate because of the lack of the physical nature of it, and the price jumps up and down so much quicker. But a lot of times with these investments, it's like you see the potential for the return, but there's so many other things you could have been doing to earn extra money compared to just what gets me the absolute highest return that it's hard to consider. And I think that's the one thing in finance that I keep looking at more and more and more is like it affects so much of how you approach life and your career. So if you know exactly what you're doing with your career, it makes investing significantly less complicated versus if you're at a point where you're not 100% sure, you have a lot of doors open and you want to pursue more than one of it. It's like that's when things get a lot tougher to figure out. And honestly, that's sometimes where I feel like having conversations around it makes it a lot more clear, meaning when you can figure out, I really appreciate having a dog or being able to work out on a regular basis or eat decently or like having time to do those type of things. Or like some people just don't care about anything and they just head down straight into it. It's like it really depends on the person. And being able to go, security is important to me versus I just want to get rich, or people who want to really travel. I mean, like these things matter when you're deciding on things like career versus when you're deciding what investments you have. And it's like every time you're like opening a door, it's like there's one back there where one just closed. It can be very hard. Another area where I've seen this a lot, especially with business owners, is like there's knowledge debt versus like financial debt. A lot of times people understand the fact that if you go into a lot of debt outside of like a mortgage or something, it can be fairly binding. I mean, if you have $100,000 in student loans, it's like that can be tough to deal with. Versus a lot of times like in a business, people don't talk about the fact of like if you don't have enough knowledge to be able to like grow things or increase your income or sales, like every year you spend not knowing how to increase that costs you a lot of money. You could have been earning way more, and by starting it to grow faster, it could have compounded even faster. That lack of knowledge can be quite frustrating, and it can also be the type of thing where it's like back to that same concept of good enough. It's like you know how to avoid the negatives, but not considering the high end of positives. Like even if you talk even beyond the money, it's like how many more people could you have helped if you had had access to reach to 10,000 people instead of 20? You know, that makes a big difference. And The problem is there's so much uncertainty around what actually gets you some of those more esoteric type ideas, meaning the stuff that is not the money end, meaning when you're trying to get more knowledge or you're trying to figure out some relationship or you're trying to figure out how exactly do you get to where you want but not destroy the money side of things. It's like that ends up being a lot harder to know, and it's like the risk involved is different than normal financial risk where it's like there's a standard deviation or there's a beta or like you can figure out roughly on average what would happen. It's like sometimes you could just throw 10 grand at something to get rid of your knowledge debt and get nothing from it, especially in the day and age of so many different people scamming on a regular basis. It's like it's enough to drive you bonkers. It drives me bonkers, that is for sure. I mean, I'm the type of person that would be perfectly happy to pay for all sorts of knowledge. And I mean, I already have for things where I know it works. The CFA, the CFP, the MBA to an extent, I guess. I didn't learn too much there. But nonetheless, I guess that leads into my next point of going back to school. Similar topic where it's like, let's say someone's in their career. They're 20 years in. They've gotten 2 or 3 promotions, making 100, 150,000 a year. But just can't really seem to get much further. They're just kind of stuck. That happens all the time, where it's like, you see just kind of like, I view it as the glass ceiling thing, even though I know that typically gets applied to more of sexism or racism within the workplace, but like, similar concept of like, you don't know anybody. So trying to like network to get higher than you are is a lot harder when it's like, there's always some other guy coming in that gets picked first. Versus maybe if you're getting a master's degree or a PhD or some certification or like how much is not having some sort of extra education to make your resume 10 to 20% better cost you in terms of years in order to progress your career? I think that's the type of thing people are more aware of by the time they're at that point in their career, but like then you look at like, okay, let's say you do go back to school. How much does it cost you for the amount of time you put into that you could have put into something else, meaning if you'd wanted to just stay 100% just at that job? Makes it a little bit easier, but like if you were open to doing real estate or starting some sort of business or learning more about how to invest or just spending 10 to 20 more hours a week working at your job, it's like, would that have just made it easier to get a promotion? It's like, it's hard to know. That's the hardest part with opportunity cost is like, how do you know? And like sometimes having the conversation helps. Other times you're just throwing darts in the dark and hoping one of them works out. And like that's a lot easier if you have a lot more darts to work with. But you know, if you barely can scrape together $4,000 or be able to put together some certification and then it doesn't work out at all, it's like all of a sudden you've lost 2 years of your life and you're sitting there going, what am I doing? I really like having those conversations with people of like trying to figure out what works best for somebody when they're not 100% sure of what they want to do, or even better, I mean, for me personally, what's even better is like someone knows what they want to do, but they don't know how to get there, because a lot of times I feel like that's where I'm like, I know how to do that part. I know how to go from A to B, but figuring out the how, what do you want to do, or how do you want to make an impact, how much are you willing to selfishly like just have for yourself, I mean, that's a hard one. That's a conversation I feel like I've been having more frequently is, do you want to have more of an impact, or do you want to make more money, or can you do both? Meaning, let's say someone's interested in politics, but they also realize how frustrating that can be and how little someone working on a grassroots campaign can make at 30 or 40 grand a year. I mean, it makes it hard to have a family, live a comfortable life, you know, but a lot of times I feel like when you start analyzing all of the options available, there's a lot more to consider if you take alternative routes to get where you want and you're willing to do extra difficult periods for a few years in order to get there, there's usually more risk involved. But I feel like a lot of times that people can do more with their life than they necessarily think they might be able to when you consider the positive side of opportunity cost, meaning if I'm willing to push myself to this degree to get what I want and then I can be comfortable for a much longer period, it's like, how many more doors does that open up? And when you're willing to think creatively about that type of thing, I think there's a lot more options available, especially in a country where there's like so much opportunity. It's ridiculous. Um, Another area you see opportunity cost come up a lot is like politics, meaning you look at like being in war versus peacetime, meaning how much more money could you have made if it was peaceful and people could just have free trade. I feel like a lot of times it gets like misdiagnosed that it's like World War II, United States made lots and lots and lots of money off of tons and tons of deficit spending, but a lot of times like these little teeny tiny wars that we have, it's like it's just money, money, money thrown and not a lot of earning on things. Because I feel like back in, hundreds of years ago, imperialism, you would end up taking over countries and then get some sort of benefit, even if it was, morally gray. I don't even know if it was gray. It might have just been bad. But then past that, I mean, you look today and you have wars, and it's like, is there any benefit at that point? I mean, someone's getting benefited, but like as a country, when you look at just GDP, did you gain something from it? A lot of times, it's like sometimes, but or you look at like recently tariffs versus free trade. Like when you have countries that are like trying to push each other to give better deals to each other, like how far do you push versus how much do you like let go to be able to try and get free trade, where everyone just freely lets the goods flow across borders? I mean, there's so much to consider when you look at that high a level that it makes it a lot harder. But those can sometimes be more interesting conversations. I personally prefer looking at things on more of a micro level instead of like macro, which makes politics not as interesting. I prefer these kind of one-on-one type conversations, but nonetheless, I think the big takeaway in all of this is that as far as opportunity cost goes, just making sure you're not just considering the negative side, but also all the different options available on the positive side if you're willing to take some risk, but as well be able to look at all of the options available if you are willing to push yourself a little bit and be creative with things. It absolutely massive. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got as far as thoughts on opportunity costs for now. If you guys have any questions or anything, definitely let me know. And other than that, I appreciate you watching.